Okay, will we get this session started? I was going to say something else. Welcome back, everyone, to the awesome sessions in this session 3 of One Welfare and the Environment. Our first talk is going to be by video from Mark Jones, Born Free Foundation in Spain. It's about operationalising One Welfare into global policymaking to prevent zoonotic disease risk. Thank you, Mark. You can go ahead.
Policy specialist at Born Free, and I'm giving this talk on behalf of myself and
Adeline
Rose, head of policy at Born. For the past 6 years, we've been working to advance wildlife and biodiversity policy at various global forums, including the UN Convention on Biological Diversity, the Sustainable Development Agenda, and more recently, the World Health Organization. Today, I'd like to talk about operationalizing One Welfare into global policy making in order to prevent zoonotic disease risk and address other pressing environmental challenges. A quick word first about Born Free. We're an international wildlife protection charity based in the UK. Animal welfare is a priority for Born Free. Part of what we do is rescuing and relocating wild animals that have suffered in captivity, and in our education and conservation work, we address human-wildlife conflict mitigation and promote coexistence between animals and communities. So compassionate conservation and due regard of the individual animal are at the core of what we do, with the ultimate goal to keep wildlife in the wild. Over the past 5 years or so, we've observed the animal welfare argument really progress in some high-level literature and official policy documents. Although references are not systematic, the benefits of improving animal welfare people, and on the other hand, the consequences of ignoring it, are getting harder to ignore, particularly after COVID-19, which showed that pandemics are not a human health matter alone, and provided further evidence of the clear links between human health and well-being and the way we treat nature and animals. So the 3 quotes here were taken out of important government and UN-backed reports, which were developed to inform policy and which will highlight the interlinkages between animal welfare and public health, with specific recommendations on what measures countries should take to prevent zoonotic disease risk from animal exploitation. We've also seen that the One Health approach has received increased political attention worldwide, which demonstrates an acknowledgement that holistic concepts and solutions are essential in the context of multiple global crises. Political declarations, including at the UN High-Level Political Forum on Sustainable Development, have included references to One Health, other holistic approaches, and to the well-being of animals. Another significant moment for the movement was at the 5th session of the UN Environment Assembly in 2022, where governments adopted a resolution recognizing the importance of animal welfare to tackle environmental challenges such as the loss of biodiversity, and recognized its important role in achieving the Sustainable Development Goals. Animal protection organizations are also more frequently given the opportunity to host special events at UN meetings, which, by explaining One Health and in particular why the One Welfare framework is a broader concept, as health is a subset of welfare, contribute to mainstreaming the interrelationships between achieving the SDGs and improving animal welfare. Ongoing processes which have the potential to operationalize One Health, One Welfare and encourage public policy implementers to use the frameworks are the joint CBD-WHO's Global Action Plan on Biodiversity and Health, which currently incorporates considerations for animal welfare and encourages synergy and cooperation between sectors in its priorities and protected activities. And in 2021, the World Health Assembly established an intergovernmental negotiating body, INB, to draft and negotiate an international instrument under the Constitution of the World Health Organization to strengthen pandemic prevention, preparedness, and response. The instrument should be considered for adoption at the 2024 World Health Assembly. Born Free is an official INB observer, and we work alongside partners in a dedicated coalition We ensure that the new instrument and the mechanisms, action plans and funding that will support its implementation incorporate elements that will initiate a real shift in the way we interact with animals and the natural world. For example, the draft treaty currently doesn't place enough emphasis on prevention at source before an outbreak occurs, when we know that protecting animals, the environment and the communities that come into daily contact with pathogens is how we can prevent pandemics. So by mobilizing relevant sectors, disciplines and communities to work together, One Welfare is highly relevant here, as reducing or eliminating high-risk human activities such as wildlife trade, habitat destruction and intensive farming are vital to tackle the root causes of zoonotic disease transmission. Developing appropriate legislation and regulatory frameworks is the first step, so as the negotiations continue, we will keep making the case for the incorporation of One Health, One Welfare into the instrument, as it would encourage a long-term collaborative and integrated approach that would mobilize relevant sectors, disciplines and communities to work together to prevent, prepare for and respond to future pandemics. And thank you for listening.
Thank you. I believe Adeline was the speaker there. Obviously, it wasn't Mark Jones. I'm sorry about that. Do we have Adeline online or no? No. Okay. Well, unless there's any point that anyone would like to raise, maybe she's listening, or we will move on, I guess, to the next paper, which is Anne Smid, and Anne is with us, I believe, and she's going to talk about the public perception of dairy farming in Canada through a One Welfare lens.
Thank you, everyone, for attending this presentation. My name is Marieke Smid, and I'm a postdoc at the University of Calgary. And today I would like to talk to you about one of our latest studies in which we studied the public perception of dairy farming through a One Welfare lens. So why did we even do this study, right? Well, we know that for a socially sustainable dairy industry, it is very important to better understand what public perceptions of dairy farming practices actually are. Because only if we truly better understand public perceptions of dairy farming practices can we help the dairy industry to potentially adapt its farming practices so that they align better and more with public concerns and with public beliefs and with public values, so that we help prepare the dairy industry to create a vision in which the practices are more in line with public values. So we aim to understand public perception of dairy farming in Canada before and after farmer-led farm tours on 3 commercial dairy farms in Alberta, which is a province in Canada. So what did we do? Well, we had farmer-led tours on 3 commercial dairy farms. So these were open farm days, so this was not organized by the researchers, but we connected with the dairy farmers that organized those types of farm tours. And they invited all of they invited the public, the Canadian citizens, on their farms, and they provided farm tours to explain what they were doing on their dairy farms and why. So we connected with these committees of the dairy farm open farm days, and we connected with them, and we had about 10 farmer tour guides per event that we collaborated with. So we had a total of 30 farmer tour guides in total. So the public that was attending these open farm days was invited to complete some surveys. So one survey before they toured the farm, to understand what they were thinking before they really went onto the farm about dairy farming, then one after the farm tour, and then 2 weeks after the event via email. And what we were specifically interested in was the perceptions of Canadian dairy farming on the basis of these, based on the public vision on this. So basically, we focused on perceptions of these visitors on dairy cow quality of life, as well as what these people thought about the environmental stewardship of dairy farmers. So we had a total of 308 respondents. So these people filled out both the pre and the post-tour survey, and 160 of these also filled out a 2-week post-tour survey. A total of 60% of these respondents were female, 38% identified as male, and 2% as other. And when we looked at where these participants lived for most of their life, we noticed that at least about a third lived rurally, and the rest, so about 2/3, suburban or urban. And about 98% consumed dairy products, and the 2% that didn't, the reasons as to why they didn't consume dairy products was because they were intolerant to these products. So you would, and like you have to just keep in mind here that we are talking about a pretty quote-unquote positive dairy crowd, which is totally fine because it doesn't necessarily have to be representative. However, you have to keep in mind that, I mean, these people are interested in dairy farming. They give up like a Saturday afternoon, probably often with their kids, with their family, to go to these dairy farms. They were interested in it, so don't take this sample as necessarily representative of the Canadian dairy farm, of the Canadian citizens. So when we look at how people shifted or not shifted in terms of what they thought about the quality of life of cows, what you see is that 51% of the visitors, they did not shift. So before they, so basically before they arrived at the farm versus after the tour, they didn't really change their opinion. So either they thought, okay, the quality of the life of the dairy cow in Canada is pretty good, and they left and they still thought it was pretty good, or they came in and they thought it was kind of bad, and they left and they thought, yeah, see, it is kind of bad. So they didn't shift any of their perceptions here. But then 41% of these people became more positive, and 8% became more negative about dairy cow quality of life. So when you look at what happens with the environmental how people thought about the environmental responsibility of dairy farmers, you can see kind of a similar idea. 51% of the people didn't change their opinion, 44% became more positive, and then 5% became more negative. But then when you look at what happens in that time that people filled out that post-tour survey, so after the farm tour, immediately on that day, versus 2 weeks later. Because people go home, they start to talk about, what they have seen with other people, and they may look things up on the internet. So is that going to influence their longer-term perception of dairy farming? So it actually did. Interestingly, about 2/3 of the people didn't change their perception of the cow quality of life in those 2 weeks, but you can see that over a quarter, so 27% actually became more negative, and 9% became more positive. Interestingly, when you look at what people were thinking about the environmental responsibility of dairy farmers, about 35% in those 2 weeks again became more negative. And the interesting thing is here is we have all these numbers, those give, they give some kind of information to us because we see that in 2 weeks people became more negative, way more negative actually than during that farm tour. So what the farmers achieved during that farm tour isn't really sustainable as in terms of, that it actually, the positive perceptions last very long. But the idea is like, why do people become more negative, and what are their concerns, right? So because if the farmers understand the concerns of the citizens better, they may be able to adapt these farming practices to become more socially sustainable. So that's what we did with the qualitative data part of this. We wanted to really better understand the visitors' concerns. So why do you think, what are your concerns and why? So when we looked at the after-tour concerns, so after the people visited the farm, so that's either on the day off or 2 weeks later, what are they mainly concerned about? And it was actually interesting because it was pretty straightforward in terms of animal welfare. There's two main topics that people were concerned about. One was a lack of outdoor access for dairy cows, Because just to give you an idea, only 20% of the lactating dairy cows in Canada, they have pasture access. And people were also concerned about the early separation of the cow and the calf. So they often are getting separated within 24 hours, and people really had a hard time with that. So for example, in terms of the cow-calf separation, someone said, well, the mother cows do not seem to form relationships with their babies, as right after birth, they are removed from one another to reduce the spread of disease. Are the mothers okay with this? Is there an alternative to this? Someone else, and this was very frequent, someone said, still think the cow should have some outdoor access or some pasture time. When you then look at the environmental concerns, there was two main topics again coming up. That was the use of palm oil in cow feed, as well as the emissions of greenhouse gases as related to dairy farming. So in terms of greenhouse gas emissions, someone said, well, my concerns are about whether dairy farming can be done without releasing significant greenhouse gases and still be profitable and competitive with other countries. And then in terms of the palm oil, someone said the use of palm oil in some feeds is concerning. And there were quite a few of these quotes that were aligning with this. So overall, when we look at the general data, we see that 44% and 41% of the visitors, they reported improved perceptions towards the environmental responsibility of dairy farming and dairy cow quality of life when they immediately after they left the farm. But then when you look 2 weeks later, that has regressed to 35% and 27% of the participants that had more negative perceptions. And when you really look at what are these concerns based on, in terms of animal welfare, it is the cow-calf separation, early cow-calf separation, and lack of outdoor access. When you look at the environmental part, people are concerned about the emission of greenhouse gases from dairy production, as well as the inclusion of palm oil in dairy cow feed. So with that, thank you so much to the funders and to you.
Thank you very much for your very clear presentation. There was a question online there 1 second ago, but it's vanished. But I think I remember it. It was a question asking, do you think the farms that were allowing these visitors on were above average farms? Were they, you said the visitors were not necessarily representative. How representative do you think the farms were of the industry?
Yeah, that's a good question. I would say from what I know from the Alberta dairy farms, pretty representative. Not necessarily that they were much better. I mean, they were not the 10% worst because, the whole idea is that this industry at that day gives a really positive perception, right? So they will not really, for example, they would never show a tie stall because there's so little in Alberta, and that's not really what they would like to show. But the interesting thing was that you could already see by the selection of the farms how the discrepancy between the citizens and the farmers, because the farmers selected, for example, a really good or a really, in their eyes, like very amazing farm, everyone indoors, super clean, super hygienic. But the calves, for example, the first thing that the visitors saw in one of these farms was calves in hutches on chains. And people hated it. So, and the farmers were like, well, this is great, no? Because they are clean and they are healthy. And so it was very interesting. So I would say overall, yes, definitely representative. Yeah.
Is there any quick question from the floor? Yes, up here, Dale. Oh, sorry, up there. I did.
Dale Duma from Manitoba Agriculture in Canada. I'm fascinated with the shift from the immediately post-tour to the 2 weeks later. I'm not surprised, but I find it very interesting. And I'm not sure if you've asked questions about the why, but I'm very curious because it's similar to kind of things I've seen elsewhere, where people that have direct access to a producer or a farm generally come back with very positive feedback and they feel connected, they feel good about what's happening, and then they get back home, they hit social media, they get bombarded by messaging that maybe doesn't align with, in our case, Canadian agriculture. And their perception quickly drops back down to that lower level based on what's out on the international social media. Do you think that's playing a role, or do you think it's more related to their direct connections, family, friends, communities?
Right. Thank you for that question. I didn't have a lot of time to dive more into this, but there is this psychological concept that's called the reciprocity phenomenon. And the idea there is that it's if you provide someone with a very nice breakfast, for example, because this was officially it's called the breakfast on the farm. So these people come into the farm, they get a free breakfast. They had, there's all these toys and games for the kids, so they love this day, right? So it's very hard to provide criticism or critiquing to someone that has just provided you a favor, right? So I think that's one of the ideas of us to why, these people gave pretty positive feedback in an anonymous survey on the day off, because they were just really, it's hard to critique someone, even anonymously, if that person or that organization has done something really nice for you. So I think that plays a role. This whole reciprocity phenomenon, and then in 2 weeks later, all these fluffy, happy feelings are kind of, at least they don't interfere with the feedback a lot. But the interesting part was when we asked people also, okay, well, why did you become more negative? Nobody mentioned anything about PETA or any kind of, that we were like, okay, well, this is also, this may not be a trustworthy source. Nobody mentioned that. Some people mentioned, actually, there was one person who referred to the Western Producer, for example, which is an agricultural magazine, in which they were like, well, in this magazine, for example, it said that it's better to house calves together, but on this farm, it was said that it's better to house them individually. But how does that align? It was almost like they really like to have another follow-up with all the questions that have come up. But I didn't really see in the data a lot of evidence that people went to kind of untrustworthy or animal rights resources. Yeah.
Great, thank you. Thanks again. Okay, our next talk is going to be online, about the contributions of working equids to community resilience in the Dry Corridor of Nicaragua. The name I have is Fredred Valdivia, but I do not believe that it's you. If you'd like to introduce yourself and go ahead with your presentation.
Hola, mi nombre es Isabel Box y trabajo en la oficina regional de Brooke para América Latina y el Caribe. En esta ocasión tengo el agrado de presentarles los resultados del estudio de los equinos de trabajo en la resiliencia comunitaria del corredor seco de Nicaragua.
Central America is the second most vulnerable region to climate risks. It is exposed to different phenomena like hurricanes, volcanoes, storms, droughts, and other natural disasters. In the region, there are 1 million equids that are directly related to the ways of living of people in terms of food safety, access to educational centers, access to hospitals, and water. They also participate in the social and cultural dynamics of the communities. The Dry Corridor of Central America runs from Mexico to Canada, where 10.5 million people live and around 700,000 working equids. 80% of the population live in poverty conditions, especially those families that work in subsistence agriculture. They depend on the different seasons to produce food. Climate seasons have degraded ecosystem services of dry tropical forests, worsening food crisis. Nicaragua is the country in Central America with more equids and livestock. It's the fourth country in terms of risks to have or suffer from disasters. 40% of the population work in subsistence agriculture. In the north of the country, in the Dry Corridor, we have Madrid, a department in the north of the country where families and animals face long periods of droughts, landslides, irregular rainfalls, floods, and high temperatures, which have an impact on animal welfare. However, the population is resilient, and equids can be very important when facing disasters. Nevertheless, the role of these animals in the communities when facing disasters has not been deeply investigated. That is why this study is important to document the contributions of equids in the promotion of welfare. For that, 200 owners of equids were interviewed from 32 communities of the Dry Corridor. 249 equids were valued with the animal welfare tool developed by Brooke for the Latin American countries and the Caribbean. This tool is designed to measure indicators of nutrition, health, physical environment, social interactions, and mental status under the umbrella of the 5 domains of animal welfare. We analyzed the 3 stages of a disaster. In the slow start events, natural disasters, equids are used for agriculture before the drought season takes place, and also for the markets. When the disaster has taken place, these equids, they help families and communities by transporting water and food. After the disaster, these animals take medicines to remote areas and help difficult to access communities. In sudden events like hurricanes, equids help recognize high-risk areas, and they also preserve the soil, carrying stones and sand to avoid erosion and landslides. During the disaster, they help people to evacuate the area, and they move people, and especially children, to safe places. After the disaster, they pick up debris and rubbish, and they also transport construction materials for the rehabilitation of places. In the study, we have wanted to know the role of equids in the management of risks. 90% of interviewed producers admitted that equids suffer from some type of physical risks. 95% of them stated that equids are not normally included in the emergency plans of the communities, though Nicaragua, by the way, is more advanced in this regard. 94% of households admitted that equids are more exposed to health problems, such as respiratory problems after a disaster. During this study, we identified that 13% of equids reached acceptable welfare conditions in terms of nutrition, health, behavior, and rest. As a result of the evaluation, 71% of equids showed low body conditions. 41% of equids seemed to be thirsty and tired during our observations. 70% of equids didn't have adequate places to protect from high temperatures and sun. 45% of equids had external parasites, but any type of infection. 57% of these animals had some type of injury in their bodies, and 54% of them showed problems in their hooves. I think that we can conclude that working equids are key assets in the lives of the people who own them. There is the opportunity to give more visibility in the plans for preparation and response to disaster. We need to include them. Also, welfare conditions of these animals can have an impact in the vulnerability of families and their capacity to respond to disasters. We think that the inclusion of working equids in the plans can reinforce humans' welfare and environmental protection strategies. Thank you very much for your interest, and we hope you have enjoyed this study and the presentation of its results. We are really happy to have participated here. Thank you very much, and good morning or good afternoon. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Yes, we did enjoy that. It was very interesting. Thank you. We have time for one quick question. I don't have any online, so if there's any question from the audience. Yeah, Beatrice, you can go ahead.
Can you hear me? Hi, I'm Beatriz. I wanted to ask you a question. It is obvious that families will benefit from equids in front of disasters. However, with this study that you have developed, I have a question about how could we help equids, the animals who have been useful after a disaster. I don't know whether it is going to be a second part of your study, because what I saw was just a description of the status of animal welfare in your study, but nothing else. Thank you. Yes, right now the study contemplates another phase, which is the description, not only the description of the welfare of animals. One of the proposals that we have on the table is to develop protection practices for equids to be incorporated in the response community plans. This is joint action that I think will have to take place in the communities. It's just a preparation work to prevent disasters and to have just some actions for families to, to take action in the prevention management of disasters. These actions, these ideas will have to do with nutrition and health also. But this joint action requires a training processes. I think it's a process to raise the awareness of the situation of equids from the reality of communities and taking into account the resources that local communities have.
Thank you. And we'll move on to our next presentation, thanks, which is sticking with equids, and it's from Jessica Burridge about the qualitative study exploring the physical and social environment of working equids and their owners. I think Jessica's here, but we're going to have a video of her talk, I believe.
Hi, I'm Jess from the University of Nottingham, and I'm going to talk about the physical and social environment of working equids and their owners in Colombia. The term working equid refers to horses, donkeys and mules that contribute to the livelihoods of their owners and the wider communities. There are estimated to be over 100 million working equids globally that contribute to the lives of around 600 million people. These animals are used in a huge variety of ways, including tourism, agricultural support, material transport and brick kiln work. In many cases, working equids provide the vital income owners need to feed their families. And beyond financial stability, working equids are often used for the day-to-day tasks such as taking children to school and transporting people to hospital. Unfortunately, working equid welfare is often compromised, and along with this, the owners live very precarious lives, with recent research suggesting that over 2/3 of working equid owners in Colombia are living below the poverty line. The importance of a one welfare approach can be seen easily within the working equid setting. The relationship between owner and equid is incredibly important, with owners relying on their equids for livelihood satisfaction and equids needing their owners for survival. Owner behaviour and decision-making ultimately determines the care and welfare the equids receive. However, it is likely that there are external influences that have an impact on these animals and their owners. And therefore, the aim of this project was to explore the environment working equids and their owners live in, and identify how these may impact the welfare of equids and the livelihoods of their owners. A total of 24 focus groups were carried out to explore the perceptions of a range of stakeholders, including working equid owners, women, and community leaders. Focus groups were carried out in Spanish by an in-country team and used a loosely structured narrative script. Participants were asked about their community, their alliance and relationship with their equid, and any equid-related problems they face. Audio recordings were subsequently transcribed and translated to English, and thematic analysis was performed using inductive analysis. Visual mapping was used when grouping and categorizing codes to form themes. Thematic analysis identified two overarching themes: social environment and physical environment. These interacted with each other and influenced owner behaviour and decision-making, which consequently affected the welfare of working equids. The social and physical environment is important to understand when providing support for owners and their equids. Many of these external factors are beyond the control of the owners and so need to be worked around. By understanding the environment, this will help both with the understanding what support is needed and also identifying barriers and facilitators that may be present when providing support. Physical environment had 4 associated subthemes: topography, roads, utilities, and laws and regulations. These external factors captured the immediate physical environment owners and their equids live in. Certain aspects of the physical environment, such as road quality and topography, increased the need for working equids. They also made access to human and veterinary medical care more challenging. So, for example, a large proportion of working equids live and work within rural areas, where topography and road quality are testing. The challenging topography was discussed frequently, with participants stating that it both increased the need for working equids and increased the challenges associated with caring for them. This, along with poor road quality, made transportation very difficult. This included personal transport and transportation of materials. The need for equids within this context is made clear, with other motorised options being impractical. Participants discussed how working equids acted as ambulances in some situations, highlighting the importance of these animals to the wider communities. Utilities referred to electricity, internet, water, and waste, with participants discussing the quality and availability of these utilities in each region. It was clear that there was regional variation and individual differences. Access to clean drinking water also varied between regions. And a few other regional problems that were identified by participants included rubbish collection. This was linked further with an environmental concern by participants stating that they needed to conserve the environment, but the lack of rubbish collection made this more difficult. Whilst these may not initially seem significant when considering equid welfare, this can provide vital information beyond what may be expected. For example, research has shown that equids consuming rubbish is a problem in some areas, which often results in equine colic. In this situation, understanding the lack of rubbish collection is likely to impact how the problem can be dealt with. Participants discussed the need for laws and regulations. It was suggested that there were situations where enforcement of the rules would help to improve working equid welfare. This was highlighted as important in situations where owners provided little care for their equid. Laws and regulations impact the behaviour of owners and as a result impact equid welfare. The implementation of laws and penalties around inappropriate treatment of equids would likely increase the motivation to provide appropriate care and treatment. Along with the physical environment individuals live in, the social environment can have a dramatic influence on owner behaviour and consequently equid welfare. There were 3 associated subthemes: regional and national administration, family dynamics, and external perceptions. Starting with regional and national administration, owners suggested that there was little to no support for both general regional problems and equid-related problems from leadership figures including UMATA, national government and regional administration, with owners reporting that any support that was available was often ineffective and unreliable. In addition to this, leadership figures stated that they wanted to provide support for working equid owners. However, they identified several barriers they had experienced that made this more challenging. These barriers included a lack of finances and a lack of knowledge of the current situation in regards to working equids. In addition to this, when discussing events of intentional abuse of working equids, such as beating these animals with sticks or ropes, owners made it clear that leadership figures needed to enforce laws and regulations around this. However, leadership figures stated that they required training on what to actually do in these cases. The family structure within working equid communities was discussed, with participants making it clear that the whole family relied on working equids and that it was common for the whole family to be involved with the work and care. Women are often involved in the day-to-day care of equids, including feeding and first aid, which has also been seen in other research. The inclusion of women can allow future studies and interventions to benefit all individuals involved in equid care. Participants discussed how social pressures can influence the care and treatment of working equids, with both positive and negative social pressures reported. These pressures and perceptions are likely to influence an owner's motivation to ensure the welfare of their working equid. This may either encourage them to provide appropriate care and treatment, or may provide a reason not to. This could be a very important consideration in the improvement of working equid welfare. This study has highlighted the importance of understanding the physical and social environment that equid owners live in. Identifying barriers to change will help to ensure interventions aimed at working equids and their owners are relevant and applicable. And by considering the One Welfare approach, it is possible to understand the bigger picture of working equid owning communities and provides a better understanding of how these individuals and their animals can be better supported.
Thank you, Jessica, for a lovely talk. You're here, I believe. Yes. So if anyone has a quick question for Jessica, I'm sure she'd be happy to answer. I don't have any online. Yeah, Rebecca has a quick question for you.
Jessica, I can't see. There you are. Yeah, it's just a very quick question. Because in this study particularly, you've analyzed everything, differentiating the physical and the social environment as per the definition of One Welfare. So I wonder if that's helped you in your research to actually identify the issues and challenges in a different way, and whether that's actually helped as part of the research. Thank you.
So I think it was really interesting looking at both of them, and I think they interact with each other quite a lot. And I think one thing that was really interesting is because we had separate focus groups with community leadership figures, so that included vets or members of regional administrations, along with separate ones with the working equids, the perceptions on the social and physical environment within the same communities was quite different, even if, so yeah. So I think that was quite interesting as well. But I think it will help us to understand what is possible and what barriers there will be with support.
Thank you. Thanks again, Jessica. Next we have Sarah H.Ison from Compassionate Way of Farming, who's going to talk about the One Welfare potential of dietary change.
Thank you very much. So my talk is based around a report that Compassion recently published on why high-income countries must lead on reducing the consumption of animal source foods or dietary change, including targets for the top 25 consumers. Compassion published this report to highlight a position that fewer farmed animals in nature-positive systems can regenerate soils and restore and enhance biodiversity, build climate resilience, reduce pollution, and ultimately our main aim, which is to give farmed animals the highest potential for a good quality of life. And I'll flick through this because we've heard a lot about the concept of One Welfare and One Health, but this is just my interpretation of it with some sort of topic areas linked there. So for many years, the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change have presented dietary change as an option to reduce greenhouse gas emissions, for which there is robust evidence and high agreement between leading experts. And this is unsurprising, given that the production of animal source foods produces twice the emissions of plant-based foods. But climate change experts, importantly, also highlight the co-benefits, including human health, food security, biodiversity, and of course, animal welfare. And in 2019, the EAT Lancet Commission of 37 scientists from 16 countries and from various disciplines published the results of a question they aim to answer, which is, can we feed a future population of 10 billion people a healthy diet that's within planetary boundaries? So they aim to create scientific targets for a healthy diet from sustainable food production. And this became known as the Planetary Health Diet. So the targets are based on research on foods, dietary patterns, and health outcomes. And the scientific targets for sustainable food production are based on the planetary boundaries to decrease the risk of irreversible and potentially catastrophic shifts in the Earth system. And these are climate change, land system change, freshwater use, nitrogen and phosphorus cycling, and of course biodiversity loss. So the diet contains around 2,500 calories per day, and it's a diversity of plant-based foods, low amounts of animal source foods at around 300 calories a day, but also with options to exclude animal products from the diet altogether. And it contains unsaturated rather than saturated fats, limited amounts of refined grains, highly processed foods, and added sugars. And the publication of the report has had mixed reviews, and I'm happy to discuss this with people later if they want to, with some perceiving the low consumption of animal source foods as radical, despite the potential benefits. But I just wanted to point out one thing. In the 2022 edition of the State of Food Security and Nutrition in the World report that discussed repurposing policy to make healthy diets more affordable, and this was in light of rising food prices related to the pandemic, the kind of war in Ukraine, but also more frequent and extreme weather events. So making progress towards affordable, healthy diets is really important, urgently needed. And the background paper to this report presents new methodology to estimate the average cost of a healthy diet, including the diet itself. And this includes food group amounts based on a diverse set of national dietary guidelines from 10 different countries in order to calculate the least cost healthy diet. But the main point of this slide was to show that, like the Planetary Health Diet, this contains around 300 calories per person per day from animal source foods. So a few of results that are linked to the report, but not necessarily in the report. So the map at the top here shows the calories available from animal source foods per day, with data from the FAO's food balance sheets. And this is a kind of proxy for the level of consumption. It doesn't include food waste, but it is even between countries. And then below is the income status for the same year, which was 2018, according to the World Bank. So this confirms what we already know, that there's an increase in consumption of animal source foods with income status, and there's a vast income divide. And there's a couple of outliers. So, for example, some of these countries here are quite low in consumption, and then we've got Mongolia that has very high consumption, so that's a bit of an outlier. So when looking at it like this, where we have percentage of animal source foods available in the diet versus total calories available, it's clear that high income, high consuming countries could really lead on reduction. And given the land use, the emissions, the other environmental and human health impacts of the diets, not to mention the animal suffering, what will we do if the trend continues to go in this direction? So we must really see the trend going in this direction, with high-income countries taking the lead on reduction. And I just wanted to return briefly to the cost and affordability of a healthy diet for a moment, just to give another example of a benefit to consuming a healthy flexitarian diet for consumers themselves. So at the global level, people are eating too much animal source foods, not enough fruits, vegetables, legumes, nuts and seeds. And even a least cost healthy diet is more expensive than what the world is currently consuming. And this absolutely has to change. However, the pattern varies with income status, and what it shows that Western diets, so on the far right, that dominate in higher or high-income countries are actually more expensive. So consumers could save some money as well as improve their health by eating a healthy diet lower in animal source foods, and if they can afford it, they can buy better animal source foods. So ultimately, the One Welfare potential of dietary change is clear, but the main question is, how do we do it? And Compassion's report that's shown here, and if people want a copy, I've got a QR code for different translations in different languages as well. But it has a list of suggested policy options to enable dietary change in order of what we think are the most effective to the least effective. And again, with our experience, there might be others with different views. But the highest potential is where these strategies can be combined into a national food strategy or action plan in order to be most effective. And the first thing that we see as important is to incorporate scientific evidence for healthy diets and sustainable food production into food-based dietary guidelines. This forms the basis of other policy actions. Secondly, taxes and subsidies, probably in the current cost of living crisis, more towards subsidies placed on the most damaging foods should, change slightly to align with healthy diets. And then following these dietary guidelines in public procurement, it is also an easy win where people have sort of in schools and hospitals where people perhaps have less choice and can be led towards healthier options. And finally, I'd like to thank my co-authors and colleagues at Compassion in Wild Farming and everyone at the conference and online for listening. And like I said, I have a link to the report if anyone wants to have a look. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Sarah. It was really interesting. I fully accept and think it's great what you're advocating, but I think there might be, not necessarily my concern, but there is a small concern for within our general affluent Western societies, we have cohorts, particularly young females, that are tending to be, and whatever we may think about including animal sources in their diet, but they are definitely showing to be deficient in iron and other, and it's difficult to get a message like this across without further, deteriorating their health status. And given that, of course, you can have a healthy diet, flexitarian or vegan or vegetarian, but the guidelines are so difficult for everyone to follow. There's a bit of concern for those cohorts within. So how would you? What's the solution? It's a big question, but what can we do about that?
I think it comes down to the food-based dietary guidelines. I'm not a nutrition expert, I just have to say, but there's different types of malnutrition, if you like, and Laura's referring to kind of what we would call hidden hunger. So this is nutrient deficiencies that might not be obvious, but there. And I think it's in the food-based dietary guidelines, and it's really important that they include, if people choose to be vegan or vegetarian, and for the different age groups, there should be advice on how to do that within those guidelines, so people can adopt those diets and be able to, and be able to have a healthy diet that's suitable for their needs. So I think and that's why we put it number one on the list.
Yeah, great. I think the meat-free school days are concerning some parents because they can't get their kids to eat meat, healthy foods or whatever in general. Anyway, I think there's probably lots of discussion we could have on this topic, Sarah, and thank you very much again.
Thank you.
But in the interest of time, we'll move on. Thank you. Our next talk is about bioethical decision-making and hippopotamus management within Colombia. And I'll ask the speaker to introduce yourself, please, because I have a female's name down here in front of me, and you can go ahead. Thank you.
Sí. Perfecto. Mi nombre es Santiago Henao, yo soy...
Hello, my name is Santiago. I am the professor of Isabel Cristina Guerrero. She was the one who was going to speak, but she couldn't make it, so it's going to be me. And I'm very happy to be here. And I want to thank Rebecca and the whole team to make this possible. I'm in Colombia. And when you started, it was 2 o'clock in the morning for me. So you can imagine how exciting it has been to wake up that early. I've only done it for football matches, but now I'm doing it for you as well, for One Welfare, because it's incredible. But let's talk a bit about, because we don't have a lot of time, about how to manage hippopotamus in Colombia. You might not know about this reality that we have, but let's explain bioethical decisions because it's the challenge that we're facing. So this is a painting of the recently deceased Fernando Botero, and he was talking precisely of the story, well-known story, very dramatic story of Colombia about the narco traffic with Escobar. I'm in Antioquia, that's close to Panama, to Central America. And so since 1980, Escobar brought 4 hippopotamus to Colombia. We didn't have hippopotamus in Colombia. It was 1 male and 3 females. And hippopotamus found an ideal home. And they start having more and more hippopotamus. We have more than 150 of them now. And they started to escape the confines of Escobar private menagerie, and now they're an issue. 10 days ago, there was an accident because a car basically found one. So we started to find an issue between hippopotamus, the farmers, the felines in the area, and the hippopotamus all over again. But this is now something that we are trying to approach from the One Welfare framework, because what we have is this decidophobia. This is something that I think is not new and everyone can understand, because we have to make decisions about the hippopotamus or decisions with the hippopotamus. So we need to decide whether we're going to be the one who made the decisions as anthropocentristic options or just decide with the animals together. But the idea here is that we need to be part of the ecosystem. And obviously, we need to be main agents in this process. The community is benefiting, those that live in that area. The hippopotamus are bringing tourists. People want to see them, so people come to visit the area. And for the community, it's important to keep the hippopotamus there. But at the same time, it's becoming important to establish a clear relationship between the local animals, the community of humans, and the hippopotamus in that same space. So we need political decisions and technical decision. A technical decision would be, okay, we need controlling these animals to have a certain management, and a political decision will have to do with the image the government is going to pose with this process. But this is becoming a huge polemic issue because they are changing the ecosystems, they're getting to the rivers, and so the local traditional fauna is being transformed. There is ecological damage, but at the same time, we feel empathy for these poor animals. My children, the family, they all want to go to see them. And that's another important point to take into consideration. In terms of alternatives, we could move them. We could move the hippopotamus to other places. Like, for example, Mexico, Costa Rica, they have already sent offers to get some of these for the parks and animal reserves. Then the possibility of to castrate these animals. So although it's not easy, it's a possibility, and also controlling them or killing some of them. And this is a very, very hot topic because there's too much information. is way too much information that comes about these hippopotamus concern. And most of it is false news. It's not true. There's no scientific base. So people might get different perspectives from this issue because these are sentient beings. And what we wanted was to create this bioethical matrix where we will add the 4 traditional ethical principles. But from the point of view of what was going on with the government, the academia, the communities, and this would be the way we were organizing these principles, where the One Welfare clearly it's playing a key role. Because I don't have too much time and I want also to leave some time for Q&A, I'm going to try to move a bit faster to the main area. I would like to have a lot of information because there's people from different science disciplines, biology, and I would like to know more about the reflection because otherwise we will constantly be in the same circle without having a real social impact. What we've tried is to have a global overview here where we can try to understand education, inclusive education, to train and prepare our community so that they will get an adequate scientific information, not just what people are saying on the networks, on the social networks. No, to change that source of information is fundamental. Less information, but of greater quality. And basically what we're trying is to give the government and from the Bioethical National Council all that information to make better decisions. And to have an increase of experience is also important. So we're trying to have more research about the impact these animals are having on the ecosystem, what are the best mechanisms for doing the castration processes, but decisions have to be made. And here what is affecting the most is precisely the fact that we don't want to make decisions. We have decidophobia, and that is the main issue here. And it can become a snowball effect. The hippopotamus are going to still be there. Our region needs a control option, but it's not enough because we need cohesive decisions because the human health and welfare, the health and welfare of other species need to be taken into consideration. And this will only be solved once we have more than 70% of these hippopotamus castrated. This is my email. Rebecca, thank you again for all your support to make us be here talking about this work that we've been doing, some of the works that were introduced yesterday. So thank you. And if you have any questions, I'm here for you.
Thank you very much. That was really interesting. I never knew the story about the hippopotamus in Colombia. What was I going to say? Yes, we have a minute or two for a question, and you deserve one, given that you got up in the middle of the night. Yeah, we have a question from Deborah there.
Hola, Santiago. Bueno, felicitaciones.
Hello, Santiago. First of all, congratulations for your presentation. I have actually 2 questions. The first one would be, you mentioned this this council. How many people form part of this council? How many disciplines are included? And about the possibilities, how do you think you can solve this issue that is not a new one and it's a big one? Okay, so the National Bioethical Council has 15 people selected by the government together with UNESCO in 2012. We started to work in 2020. Again, 15 people, different disciplines of knowledge. So we have religious biodiversity, ethnic communities are represented, and bioethical experts. And the vice president, I'm the vice chair of this committee. I'm one of the experts in the ethical committee because I have experience in that area, and it has been a great honor to be part of the council so far.
We should move on, Rebecca. Yeah. Okay, sorry, Santiago, we have to move on. We're running a little bit behind, but thank you very much. Very interesting.
Muchas gracias. Feliz.
Thank you. I hope you enjoy the rest of the day.
He's gone, is he? Okay, sorry about that. Okay, Beatrice, I think you were confused. You thought you were going to be
the last one.
You're last but not least. Yes, and thanks for keeping me company here. So lastly, we have Beatrice Zapata, who's going to talk about adaptive management based on behavioral studies of wild South American camelids to minimize impacts in mining areas.
Buenos días, gracias.
Good morning, and thank you. Good afternoon, if you like. The title of my work is what we have just mentioned, the adaptive management in behavioral studies of South American wild camelids to minimize the impact of mining. This is a preliminary study of around 3 years of work. Mining is an activity producing or creating a lot of conflicts with wild animals. On the other hand, at least in Chile, we have a quite extensive mining activity in the north of the country. In our legislation, we have to approve a review of mining projects, and this project that we have developed is within the recommendations implemented for mining activities. We are in phase number 1. It's going to have a phase number 2, but it's also related to a resolution of environmental quality, which is a number 074/218. This is for wild camelids, but in this occasion, I'm just going to mention vicuñas, which is the most frequent animal in the area. Mining activities, as you can see on the photograph on the right, incorporates different areas for the activity to take place on heavy vehicles, which present a risk for animals because they can be run over. And that's why we have to monitor all these incidents during the development of the process. We proposed an adaptive management scope that we thought it was recommendable for this study, and it's about identifying or preventing problems to have different solutions. The idea will be also to identify the causes of the problems and then provide solutions. The general objective was to prevent the risk of accidents with wild camelids in the area. The area is called Quebrada Blanca. We wanted to identify those areas where vicuñas walk around, and also to identify those areas where camelids can be and also create incidents or car accidents. Another objective was to identify the behavior of the animals in these areas. This is the area of the project. You can see it. You can see a picture. Our study concentrated in the paths and the ways that I don't know whether you see them. It's the yellow lines that you can see. These are the roads and the paths that existed before, but which were the focus of our study. The methodology is monitoring of groups of vicuñas from 2021 until today. We took samples in each of the seasons of the year, summer, autumn, spring, etc. We also performed behavior observations of the main activities of the animals. We observed if these animals walk in families, or if they walk alone, or if they have a couple or not. So we sample everything in each of the ways they were crossing and going around, and we were also observing all the behaviors that could be risky, like when they were crossing the roads. These animals sometimes have fights and they pursue one another, they go after one another, and this is something that we have to take into account. We analyzed and we modeled everything. We designed a model that shows the probability to have more incidents in the future. These are some of the behaviors that we registered. For example, fights, as you can see, or animals resting. In the middle, we have an animal which is alert, and more animals just watching and resting. We needed a graph to investigate the crosses, the crossroads, and everything was registered. We registered the exact geographical point, the time that went by. Everything is registered in the system that we used. The red areas are the points where animals can be at a higher risk to be run over. There are risk areas because of the behavior of the animals, and they agree with our observations because we have seen many animals killed. With the information that we have gathered, we have worked with the authorities to implement measures, as you can see, like signs or different measures and actions, which have helped reducing accidents. Vehicles started to understand that the areas were areas with animals, and from 2022 we can see a decrease in the number of accidents. In 2023 we have to start reviewing the information that we have gathered, but I think that this has to be a continuous process where measures need to be implemented so that vehicles really know what is going on in the area with the animals, so that they can, be alerted or be aware. As conclusions, the study has identified different areas where prevention measures need to be executed. The kernel density model that we have used has been shown to be useful to identify those areas which can be more problematic. Finally, the reduction in the number of accidents is possible, is a reality, if we take into account that driving culture is something that I like. Driving culture needs to be changed. Also, scientific information is important to adapt the environmental management during the different phases of the project. In 2024, we will continue monitoring animals in those areas which accidents can happen, but 2024 is the International Year for Camelids, and I don't know what is going on. Many meetings or events will take place, and we will have more information and will show the value of wild animals in ecology. Thank you for your attention.
Thank you, Beatrice. That's such a lovely, simple solution to this problem. Yeah. Very good. Any questions from the floor for Beatrice? Rebecca, this time, yes. Sorry.
Thank you. Yes, I'm not asking to rush this time. No, it was a very quick question. It's a really, well, I'll ask in English. It's a very quick question because the project is very interesting and it's a very simple solution, just to put a board to alert people. And I just wonder, from the expertise you have in this project, I mean, car crashes with animals are quite common in other countries with different species like deer, etc. So I wonder whether you have any thoughts as to whether this technique that you've identified as very successful would have also a successful impact in other countries and other species.
A ver si entendí bien, si a medidas exitosas para otros.
Sorry, because you asked in English, but and I didn't understood. The question was that the solution seems to be very simple, and I was wondering whether it will be useful for other countries with other animal species like deer. Do you think it will work in other countries with other animals? Well, mining activity is something quite specific, and communities have to be taken into account. We are talking about a place which is 400 meters above sea level. It may seem like this is a desert, but it is full of people. So the communities themselves have to play an important role observing what is going on. Then we have to take into account environmental law protection, which is very demanding in the country. Mining legislation is something that we have also to take into account. All the efforts that we can make have to be validated by scientific support and knowledge. I think that this is something particular of the area. And if you want to be successful in other countries with animals, scientific support should be necessary. I don't know what is the case in other countries with other animals, but I think scientific support and legislation have to be taken into account.
Waiting for the end of the translation. That makes sense, I think. But I know when you see signs of deer, just that a deer is going to run across the road, it doesn't make you change. But I think if you thought you saw a deer, I think it's kind of logical that you're going to hit the brakes.
Yeah, but it's also you are prepared to find a deer.
Yeah.
You know, sometimes you just go with your vehicle, your car, and you are not thinking that you maybe can find a deer. And in this case, you can find a lot of signals and stuff. And when you find a group of animals, you have to call by radio.
Oh,
yeah. So it's
very good. Okay, I think we can bring this session to a close. Again, thank you for inviting me to chair it, Rebecca, and thanks a million to all the wonderful speakers and all the interesting topics. Lots of food for thought there. So thank you all.